Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case we are covering today is of a privileged rich kid who grew up and then committed one of the most gruesome and horrific crimes you've ever heard. And I truly mean that. Today's case is literally something taken straight out of a horror movie. And the perpetrator from today's case is a man named Blake Leibel. He grew up in mansions. He was surrounded by Ferraris. He was a millionaire, multi-millionaire, probably maybe even billionaire. He then moved to Hollywood because he wanted to be this famous producer. Then he started writing comic books.
Storyline is about when a new planet enters our solar system.
But there was a problem, and that is Blake Leibel became incredibly jealous of his newborn baby. Yeah, have you ever heard of anything so ridiculous? He was jealous of a baby. His fiancée Yana had just given birth and Blake couldn't take it. The relationship became very complicated because of Blake's massive insecurities. And then all of a sudden, completely out of nowhere, a 911 call comes in that would lead to one of the most horrific crime scenes you could ever come across. And what is just the most chilling thing of all is that the very horrific real-life crime scene resembled a fictional crime scene described in a comic book written by none other than Blake Leibel himself. And that is the case we are talking about today, so let's jump in. And I just want to give a big thank you to today's sponsor, and that is ExpressVPN. And I have spoken a lot now about how ExpressVPN is the best app on the market to secure your privacy and security when you are online. I have been using ExpressVPN for years now, and I highly recommend it. It encrypts 100% of your online activity to protect you from third-party trackers who give your info to invasive advertisers and scammers. It also has the best encryption to protect you from hackers who might be lurking on public Wi-Fi, securing your private information like passwords and banking numbers. It works on every device, including phones, laptops, smart TVs, and you can use it on up to 8 devices at the same time. I have it on all of mine. So obviously all of that is super important, but there is also one other benefit to using ExpressVPN, and that is that it allows you to change your location to over 100 different countries, which is incredible because a lot of streaming services restrict what you can watch depending on where you live. And also, for those of you in the US, did you know that the BBC will soon be introducing a subscription fee of $8.99 a month for just American users? Which means that users in the US will have to pay to access BBC News content when it was free all along. But guess what? There is a way around that, and that is by using ExpressVPN, because all you'll have to do is change your location to the UK and you will still be able to access the BBC for free. On top of this, you will also have access to the BBC iPlayer for completely free, which is blocked for US users, by the way. So you can find so many crime dramas or true crime documentaries on the BBC iPlayer, and I have recommended so many now at this point. Some of my favorite crime dramas are definitely Line of Duty and Kin. Those two are a must watch. And it doesn't just work for BBC iPlayer, it works for pretty much all streaming services such as Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus, and more. So if you are simply just looking for a new show to binge, look no further than ExpressVPN, because you have the whole world at your fingertips. And right now you can get an extra 4 months of ExpressVPN for free by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now, or by going to the link in my description box, which is expressvpn.com/Danielle, to get 4 free extra months. And that is by going to expressvpn.com/Danielle. And by using that link, it really does help out this channel because it lets ExpressVPN know that you came from this video. So thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Blake Leibel was born on the 8th of May 1981, making him a Taurus. And he grew up in Toronto, Canada, where he lived with his mom, dad, and older brother. And one thing that you should know about Blake is that he comes from a very wealthy and successful family, because his mom, Eleanor, was a prominent heiress who inherited a massive plastic manufacturing business, and this made her incredibly wealthy. We are talking millionaire, multi-millionaire kind of wealthy. And that was just Blake's mom. Blake's dad was one of Toronto's biggest real estate developers. His company built tens of thousands of homes across Canada, again, making him also incredibly wealthy. So Blake has got money from both sides, and Blake's dad liked to flaunt his wealth. He was also described as, quote, the best playboy of all playboys. And he was also described as a, quote, flamboyant billionaire. So yeah, we're not even talking about millions of dollars here. We are talking billions. He owned a fleet of Ferraris. Who the hell owns a fleet of Ferraris? That's ridiculous. The family also owned a massive 300-acre estate in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Toronto. And this is where Blake grew up. This is the kind of life that he lived, surrounded by that kind of wealth. And his dad wasn't just successful in business. Oh, no, no, no. He also competed in the Olympics in a sailing event back in the 70s. So Blake's dad is a super high achiever. And Blake definitely felt like he had a lot to live up to. However, his dad also faced a lot of scandals. He cheated on his wife multiple times with sex workers. He picked up a number of sexually transmitted diseases. He was accused of taking numerous drugs. So the dad, even though he's a high achiever, is not perfect by any stretch. But Blake, as you can imagine, lived a life of privilege, a life that not many people in the world get to live. And he was set to inherit a lot of money. But was Blake's childhood all sunshines and rainbows? No, it wasn't, because there was one thing that Blake had to deal with in his childhood, and that is that he had a massive rivalry with his older brother Cody. So Cody was only 1 year older than Blake, and Blake was insanely jealous of Cody. It was a little bit of like a stereotype, like younger sibling jealous of the older sibling, because Blake thought that Cody was the favorite child, the golden child. He thought that Cody was his dad's favorite because Cody was very athletic. So he bonded a lot with the dad because the dad is obviously also athletic. But then it did kind of seem like the dad favored Cody a little bit, taking him to like different athletic events and stuff and leaving Blake behind. There was one time to get Cody on the hockey team, the dad bought the hockey coach a house, a whole house, to basically bribe him to get his son on the hockey team. And if that is not an example of the kind of privilege this kind of wealth can buy you, I don't know what is. Because Cody got onto the hockey team, of course he did, because the coach got bought a house, a whole bloody house. And Blake was really jealous of this. He was like, my dad won't buy a house for anybody for me. I'm not joking. He actually threw a tantrum because his dad wouldn't buy a house for anyone. And this plagued him for years and years. It definitely led to a lot of daddy issues. But then there was even more chaos in Blake's childhood. And that is that at some point, his parents decided to get divorced. Now, we don't know why they got divorced. It was possibly because the dad was having multiple affairs, but who knows? But either way, Blake's mom and dad, they went their separate ways. Blake's brother Cody went off to live with the dad, and then Blake stayed living with his mom. So this family really has been split down the middle. So Cody and his dad moved to the richest neighborhood in the entire city. And then Blake and his mom had to settle for the second richest area in the city. And I'm just like, wow, this is just so sad. Where is my tiny violin? They had to settle for the second richest area. It must have been so hard for Blake. And I'm being sarcastic just in case none of you can tell. So for the rest of Blake's childhood into his teenage years, he is just living with his mom and Cody is living with the dad. So by the time Blake reaches adulthood, he decides to move out of his mom's home and make his way down to Hollywood. And it was here that Blake wanted to use all of the millions and millions of dollars that he had inherited when he reached adulthood. He wanted to invest all of that into him becoming a very famous movie producer in Hollywood. But then his brother Cody also followed him to Hollywood. Cody wanted a little bit of the limelight as well, which I guarantee you Blake was not happy about, because Blake probably wanted to make his own path and just get away from his brother for once in his life. So then we get to 2006. Blake is now 26 years old, and he meets a woman called Amanda Braun, and the two of them hit it off straight away. And from the outside, people have said that they seemed like a little bit of an odd couple, like they really were just complete opposite in personality. Amanda was a model and she was an extrovert. She liked to socialize a lot. She liked to go to parties. She just liked being out and about and surrounded by people. However, Blake was the complete opposite. He preferred a quiet night in. He wasn't really the most social. He liked to read comic books and just write stories and just be creative in his own world. However, even though they did have these massive differences, they seemed to really get along and their relationship really did seem to work. And after 5 years of being together, so Blake is now 30 years old, the couple went on to get married. They have a son together, they go on vacations. They just seemed like a normal, happy family. But as usual in these kinds of cases, things don't last like that, because things soon took a turn for the worst. Because just like in Blake's childhood, there was still this massive rivalry between him and his brother Cody. However, it was at this stage in his life where he really started to resent his brother. And that is because his brother, he was still in Hollywood, but he had developed a massive gambling addiction. And he was wasting all of the millions that he had inherited. He was wasting their parents' fortune gambling, and he was getting into a lot of debt. Blake also believed that Cody was getting involved with a lot of shady people and getting involved in a lot of illegal underground poker games. And Blake started to become convinced that because his brother was getting involved with all of these shady people, his brother was putting his own son's life in danger. Because Blake was worried that if Cody angered the wrong person or got into too much debt with the wrong person, that person would take revenge out on Cody's family, which could result in him taking revenge out on Cody's nephew, i.e. Blake's son. And Blake wasn't exaggerating here either. He's not being dramatic, because his older brother is getting into a lot of debt. For example, there was one poker game where he gambled away $1 million in a single poker game. And I just have to sit here and remind myself of the kind of money we are talking about in today's case. How does anyone have that much money that they can gamble away $1 million in one poker game? That is insane. And the two brothers argued back and forth about all of this. Blake pleaded for Cody to stop, but it never worked, and Cody just continued to get involved with the wrong people and continued to gamble. But then something else very significant happens in Blake's life in 2011, and that is that his mom was diagnosed with brain cancer, and she soon passed away after this diagnosis. And Blake was absolutely devastated. I mean, his mom had basically raised him. He spent days crying his eyes out. He became very angry. He started lashing out at the people around him. And this is also when Blake took drastic measures to take it all out on his brother Cody and to lash out at his brother. Because after their mom had died, she had left a $12 million fortune to be split between her two sons. And it was to be split evenly. So each brother was supposed to get $6 million each. But was Blake happy about this? Oh, no, because he believed that he should get the whole lot. Because Blake believed that he was his mom's favourite child. I mean, he had lived with their mom, she had raised him whilst Cody went off to live with their dad, and he believed because of this, Cody didn't deserve one single penny of that inheritance. But also Blake knew that all of the money Cody would inherit, he would just gamble away. So what did Blake decide to do about this? He decided to take his brother to court. He sued his brother and said that his brother didn't deserve any of their mom's assets and that the will should be ignored. But in the end, Blake lost the court case and he actually inherited less than he was supposed to begin with. So after this bitter courtroom drama with his brother, this is when Blake threw himself into his wannabe Hollywood famous movie producer career. He did this trying to distract himself by the fact that he didn't inherit $12 million. It's just so greedy, isn't it? It's like, why couldn't he have just settled and be happy with the fact that he was getting 6? Blows my mind. But anyway, he's thrown himself into his career. He first directs a film called Bold, which was a low-budget comedy movie about a bold college student that was trying to raise money for a hair transplant. And in order to raise the money, he starts up a porn website with his fellow female college students.
I'm 20 years old and I'm losing all of my hair.
And the movie, it didn't receive the best reviews. It was just a very strange concept. People didn't think it was very good. But Blake, he kept on going. He next worked on a show called Spaceballs, which was an animated TV series based on a comic book. Spaceballs. And then finally, one other thing happened in Blake's career, which would be very significant to today's case. And that is that he decides to become a comic book writer.
Storyline is about when a new planet enters our solar system.
And we don't exactly know where this passion came from for him to write comic books. I mean, he did have an interest in comic books, so maybe it was just that. So he dives headfirst into this, writing his first comic book. It seems like it was something that he was really, really passionate about. However, one thing became clear very quickly, and that was to do with the plot lines of his comic book, because it seemed like Blake had a little bit of an obsession with very gruesome and violent murders. He would write about gruesome, violent murders in his comic books. However, Blake's biggest breakthrough when it came to writing comic books was a comic book that he wrote called Syndrome. And it was released in comic book stores all over the US. And Blake had big dreams for this comic book. He wanted it to be turned into a TV series itself. He was always in meetings throwing about his money trying to make that happen.
Storyline is about when a new planet enters our solar system. We find a new enemy that's about 12 to 18 feet, and they ride and control dinosaurs like dogs.
And in this particular comic book, Syndrome, there was a very gruesome and graphic scene. And it's about a serial killer again. And the scene is about one of the serial killer's victims being hung upside down and slowly bleeding out. And it was a very graphic, brutal murder scene. And remember this graphic, brutal murder scene, because this is very, very significant to what happens later on in today's case. So a few more years pass. We now get to 2015. Blake is now in his mid-30s. He is still with his wife, Amanda. She has just fallen pregnant for the second time, so Blake is going to become a dad of 2. And he should be really happy about this, shouldn't he? Yeah, but he's not. Blake became incredibly unhappy in the relationship, and he developed a little bit of a wandering eye. Yes, he became basically like his dad. The apple didn't fall far from the tree, did it? Because Blake starts seeing multiple women on the side. And this is when he met a woman named Yana Cassian. And things will go very quickly downhill from here. And Yana was born in Ukraine in 1986. She studied law at university and she worked as a lawyer for the country's tax service. She was highly educated, very talented, and she had big dreams. She had always dreamed of moving to California. She just loved the idea of living in California. She loved the beach, she loved the sea, and she wanted to settle down there and start a family. And this is exactly what she did. She decided to pursue her dreams. She moved to LA when she was 28 years old. She started working as a model, and she really hoped that she would find the right person, that she would find love, and she would start a family there. And it wasn't long until she does meet somebody. And who was that somebody? Well, of course, it was Blake Leibel. And the two of them hit it off. Blake seemed to be the man of Yana's dreams. She was like, oh my God, this is everything that I've ever wanted in a man. But there was one problem. And that is that Blake is married. Yeah, he's still married to Amanda, who is pregnant, by the way. So he told Yana that he was actually in the process of getting a divorce from his wife, which was not true. However, Blake still being married was not the only problem. Oh no, because Blake was actually in a relationship with another woman called Constance. And Blake's affair with Constance had actually been going on for a while behind his wife Amanda's back. So Blake is in a relationship with 3 women at the same time, and to keep all of these women separate and to keep all of his affairs a secret, Blake moved Constance in a spare home that he owned, and then Blake also moved Yana into a spare home that he owned. So he has these 3 women in 3 separate houses, and he literally just goes between each house living 3 separate lives. He has a house with his wife Amanda, a house with his girlfriend Yana, and a house with another girlfriend called Constance. And again, my mind is blown. How does he own so many houses in LA. It's crazy. The money, I know I keep saying it, but it's just crazy. And things progress very quickly now between Blake and Yana, because Blake, he's still married to his wife Amanda. He actually proposes to Yana, and he's still married. It's crazy. So Yana believes that Blake has now divorced his wife. She says yes. And then things get even more complicated because Yana actually falls pregnant. And Blake's wife Amanda is also pregnant at the same time. You can't even make this stuff up. So Blake's wife is pregnant and Blake's fiancé is also pregnant at the same time. But Yana obviously has no idea about this. Yana is living out her dream. And as her pregnancy progresses, Yana's mom, Olga, moves over from Ukraine to be close to her daughter to help her out throughout the pregnancy, but then help her out once the child arrives. And this is where things start to go downhill because Blake did not like Olga. No, he did not like his future mother-in-law at all. And why didn't he like his future mother-in-law? That is because Olga was talking about the baby too much. Yes, you heard that right. Blake is getting angry at his future mother-in-law because she is so excited about the birth of her grandchild and about the fact that her daughter Yana is going to give birth. Blake didn't like how much attention this baby was getting. He wanted them to be talking about him. And all of this baby talk, it was hurting his poor ego. And these tensions continue. And then eventually, Amanda, Blake's wife, gives birth first. And then not too long after that, his fiancée Yana gives birth. And during labor and the birth and everything, Blake was an absolute nightmare, which what did we expect? He was so controlling, he wouldn't let Yana's mom, Olga, anywhere near her daughter, Yana. He wanted to keep the mom and the daughter separate. He was also having full-on tantrums like a toddler. He took the saying, throwing his toys out of the pram, too literally, because that is what he was doing. He literally was taking the baby's toys and throwing them on the ground. And I'm not joking there. He was actually doing that. And then once the baby was born, once they went back home with the baby, this is when Blake started regularly shouting at Yana for showing the baby too much attention and for not showing him enough attention.
Father, mother, daughter, beautiful.
And it's crazy. It's like they have literally just gotten home and they have a newborn baby. This is Yana's first child. Of course, she is going to be showing that baby attention because first of all, the baby needs attention. But second of all, she's a good person. She's a good mom. Of course, she's going to show her baby attention. So Olga, Yana's mom, heard about this. And she said to her daughter, this is not right. You need to get out of this relationship. He is not a good person. But Yana wanted to stay with Blake. She didn't want to give up on him. She believed that he was a good person deep down. Maybe he was just struggling to adjust to the fact that they now had a baby. And she didn't want to give up on the relationship, especially now that they did have a baby. So Blake actually decided to take extreme measures. He rented out another apartment. And who was this apartment for now? Because he already has so many homes with so many different people in. Well, this new apartment that he started renting was for Olga, the grandmother, and the new baby. Yeah, he wanted to ship off his newborn baby to go and live with their grandmother whilst he stayed in his home with Yana, and he had Yana all to himself. And I just want to point out that this was a matter of days after the baby was born. Blake was so insecure and so jealous of this baby. He couldn't take the fact that Yana was showing the baby so much attention that he wants to ship the baby off. Can you imagine how traumatic that would have been for Yana? She's a new mom and she's now having to be separated from her new baby. I don't think I've ever heard anything so ridiculous in my life. Why is this grown-ass man jealous of a baby? His baby, like this is his child. Why doesn't he step up and be a dad? But Yana agreed for this to happen. She was willing to do anything to make her dreams of having this happy family come true. And I'm assuming here, but I assume she probably thought that this was very temporary and that soon the baby was going to move back in and everything was going to be okay. However, things only continue to get worse. Because remember, Blake also has another woman that he's seeing on the side, a third woman named Constance. Well, just days after Yana had given birth to her and Blake's baby, this is when Constance accused Blake of sexual assault. And she filed an official complaint with the police. And the police came and arrested Blake. at his home that he lived at with Constance. So Blake went to jail. And who did he phone to come and bail him out? His fiancée, Yana, which is just crazy. Just days after giving birth to their baby via C-section, she is being dragged out to bail her fiancé out of jail, who has been accused of sexually assaulting his girlfriend. So this is also when Yana finds out about the affair that he's having. She finds out that Blake was keeping another woman in another house, and that was his girlfriend. And I'm like, wow, how does he have the audacity to phone Yana to bail him out of jail? She's got a newborn baby to look after, and herself, because obviously she's had a C-section. And God knows about Blake's actual wife, Amanda. Because yeah, it's very easy to forget that he's also still married to another woman. I don't think Yana knew about his wife, Amanda. And I don't think his wife, Amanda, knows about Yana and Constance. So yes, Yana bails Blake out of jail. And it just continues to get worse, because when he returns home, he starts demanding sex from Yana, who has just given birth. And Yana was like, no, I don't feel like it. I have literally just given birth. And Blake actually said, fine, if you don't have sex with me, I'll just go and find it somewhere else. Oh, he's an absolute idiot. He was threatening to cheat on his fiancée, who right at this very moment is in a very vulnerable position after giving birth and her hormones and everything. And she's just found out about another affair that he was having. And that woman has accused him of sexual assault. You really can't make this stuff up. It's more far-fetched than the comic books that he was writing. But Yana didn't give in to Blake's demands. Thank God she did not have sex with him. And I don't know, but he probably did go out and cheat on her. But over the next couple of weeks, Blake made her life a living hell. He scrutinized every movement that she made. He was constantly breathing down her neck, putting her down, insulting her. He also tightly controlled the amount of time she spent with her new baby. The new baby that's living with the grandmother in a different apartment. And it just breaks my heart how controlling he is being, how abusive he is being when she's so vulnerable right now after just giving birth. And this goes on for 2 weeks until a terrible event occurs. And very sadly, this is now when we get to the tragic events of today's case. Because on the 23rd of May 2016, which was approximately 3 weeks after Yana and Blake's baby was born, Yana managed to get away from Blake for just a few hours of freedom. And her mom Olga, they went out shopping for the baby. But whilst they were out shopping, Yana kept receiving text after text after text. They would just not stop. And Olga could tell by her daughter's face that something was wrong. Like something about these messages, something just wasn't right. Yana seemed really upset by whatever was being said in these messages. But Yana didn't tell her mom what these messages were about. And the context of these messages would actually never be known. But it was at this moment when Yana told her mom that she needed to leave straight away. Yana dropped everything and rushed back to Blake. And Olga was left with the baby. Now Olga had this feeling in her gut that just something wasn't right. She had no idea what was going on, but she just felt like something awful was going to happen. Because we now get to the next day, the 24th of May. And Olga had been waiting all of that time to hear back from her daughter. She wanted to know that everything was okay. But Yana hadn't gotten in touch with her mom. And Olga couldn't get hold of her daughter no matter how many times she phoned her or messaged her. Yana didn't respond, which was unusual because Olga and Yana, they spoke all of the time. Yana would never have ignored her mom. And Olga again just knew that something wasn't right. She wanted to rush over to where Blake and Yana lived and confront Blake because she knew that Blake was behind those messages. But she was looking after the baby and she couldn't leave the baby alone and she didn't want to take the baby over to a possible hostile environment. So she phoned the police instead. But there was one problem. Olga didn't speak very good English. So even though she was on the phone to the police, she was trying to get the police to understand what she was saying, to go over and check on her daughter. The operator on the other end of the phone, they couldn't quite understand what she was saying. So after the phone call, Olga thought that the police had understood her and that they were going over to check on her daughter. But because the operator couldn't really understand her, the police never went over to check on Yana. So now another 24 hours would pass and Yana was still nowhere to be seen and wasn't heard from. So we now get to the next day, the 25th of May. 2 days since Olga last saw her daughter, and Olga just couldn't take it anymore. There is no way that Yana would ignore her mom for this long. And even though Olga believed that the police had been over to check on her daughter, she still decided that wasn't good enough. She needed to see her daughter with her own eyes. So she finally found someone that could look after her granddaughter, and then she stormed over to Blake and Yana's place. She started banging on the front door, but nobody was opening. So she went around and looked in the window, and she saw Blake right there in the home. He was clearly completely ignoring her. So Olga started literally screaming at him, yelling at him to open the door, asking him where her daughter was, but he never responded. He literally just pretended like she wasn't there. So Olga had no choice but to call the police again. She was panicking at this point. So the police, they do show up at the apartment. The police start banging on the door, but Blake is ignoring the police as well. And Olga was literally demanding that the police break down that door. She needed to see her daughter. She was incredibly worried about her daughter's safety. But the police said that they couldn't do what Olga wanted. As far as the police were concerned, there was no foul play. So they couldn't just break the door down when they didn't have any suspicion or didn't have any reason to. The police did try and get into contact with Blake as well, but he just ignored them. And the police stayed outside of the home for several hours with Olga, but Blake never showed. He never showed his face, he never opened the door, he never answered the police. And eventually Olga had to go home to look after her granddaughter. So another 24 hours have gone by and no one has seen Yana. The police also went away, and this decision would soon come back to haunt both Olga and the police. So we now get to the 26th of May, the third day since Olga had seen her daughter. And Olga phoned the police once again. She was still devastated. She was still begging the police to do something. And finally, the police agree to do something because they still hadn't heard back from Blake either. So now there was suspicion and reason to break into the apartment. So the police head over to the apartment. Olga is right there behind them. The police get a key from the building manager. So the police try and open the door, but they can't because it's blocked. Very, very suspicious. Blake had blocked the door from the inside. So the police were now really on their guard. This was incredibly suspicious. They knew that Yana was in danger. So the police physically break down the front door. And what they found inside this apartment shocked them to their core. Because the first thing that they noticed is that the living room was in complete disarray. Food was everywhere, the cushions from the sofa were overturned. The place was just a mess. So the police rush over to one of the bedrooms. They try and open the door, but this door was blocked as well. So they break this door down. They enter the room, which was the guest bedroom, and it was dead silent in this room. The mattress was missing from the bed, and this is when the police noticed that there were blood stains all over the walls. So the police officers were in full alert mode now because there is blood everywhere. The police noticed that there was another door attached to this room that led to a different room. So the police rush over to that door, try and open it, but that door is blocked as well. And that door led to the master bedroom. And guess who was inside? Blake Libel. Blake finally revealed that he was in the apartment and that he was in that master bedroom. And he started saying, "I'm not coming out. I'm not coming out. Yana is not here. You're wasting your time. She's not here. I'm not coming out." But the police obviously didn't believe him because there was blood everywhere. So they tried negotiating with Blake, but he was very agitated. He was not cooperating. But in the end, this is when Blake decided to surrender. And he unlocked the door. And Blake came out wearing nothing but his underwear. He was covered in blood from head to toe, and the police storm inside that master bedroom. And this is when the police discovered one of the most chilling and gruesome crime scenes that they had ever come across. Because the first thing that they saw was a giant blood stain smeared across the wall. It was smudged and damp, almost like someone was trying to clean it off. And then they turned to the bed, and this is when they found Yana. And she was lying in the middle of the mattress, and the police, when they first saw her, they really hoped that she was still alive, that she was just sleeping. But when they got closer, it soon became apparent that she was not alive. Jana had been the victim of a horrific murder. And tragically, this is the moment when 30-year-old Jana Cassian was pronounced dead, which just breaks my heart. She literally has only just had a baby 3 weeks prior to this, and that was her dream, to move to LA, California, and start a family. And she literally was just doing that. She was living out her dream. She had so much life ahead of her with her child. But to make things even worse, I now need to describe to you what happened in this room and how Jana lost her life. And I just have to give a warning. It is very, very gruesome, and it's going to be hard to listen to, because this was no ordinary murder. This was prolonged torture. And it is one of the worst things that I have heard in my life, especially given the fact that it was Blake that did this to his fiancée, the mother of his child. So as the police began processing the crime scene, they began looking at Jana's body. And this is when they made the horrifying discovery that Jana's scalp had been completely removed. And I mean her entire scalp. Completely gone, completely removed. There were blood stains all over where she was lying on the mattress. There was blood all over the walls, on the side tables. There was also a clump of hair and a bloodstained razor near a trash can. And a portion of Jana's eyebrow was just lying on the floor next to the bed. So that is a part of her eyebrow and the skin underneath that eyebrow, just lying there on the floor. And when the examiner looked closer at Jana's body, they realized that her scalp had been removed from her eyebrows all the way to the back of her hairline at the back of her head. Her scalp was fully, completely gone. Her skull bone was visible, and all the tissue on the top of her head had also been removed. There were cuts to her lower forehead below her eyebrows, as well as along her jaw. Her left ear was also completely missing. It was clear that a blade had been used to remove certain parts of Jana's face. But in other circumstances, parts were removed by Blake's hands. And based on the amount of injuries to Jana's face and skull, and the difficulty involved in the combination of tearing and cutting, it was determined that this series of injuries took place over a prolonged period of time. And what exactly had been happening over those 3 days that Jana was missing? Well, remember Blake's comic book, the one titled Syndrome, that I said would be very significant in today's case? Well, in this comic, Blake seemed to be obsessed with the idea of blood draining and removing people's scalps, because the literal art on the cover of this comic book was the creepiest picture of a baby doll with its scalp removed. A brain is sticking out from the top of the head, and this art has chilling similarities to what Blake did to Jana. But it wasn't just that. No, inside the comic book, one of the stories was about a serial killer who had murdered one of his victims by hanging them upside down and draining him of all of his blood whilst he was still alive. And obviously that is completely sadistic, and it should have stayed in fiction, because it turns out that Blake himself was also obsessed with bloodletting. He wanted to recreate this scene from his comic book in real life, and he used this scene as the blueprint for the awful torture that he carried out on Jana. Because after an autopsy and a detailed investigation, police discovered that over those 3 days, Blake had clearly restrained Jana, forced her down on the bed, and removed her scalp whilst she was still alive. And I just can't believe that he did that when she was still alive. And from the autopsy, they knew that she was still alive because there were so many defense wounds. There were cuts and bruises all over her arms, hands, and wrists, evidence of blunt force trauma to her face, where Blake had clearly tried to knock her out. And there were also finger mark nails under Jana's jaw, indicating that Blake also had his hands around her throat. There were also human bite marks over Jana's jaw and bicep. So Blake had clearly fought hard to restrain Jana. And how do we know that she was still alive whilst she was being scalped? Well, first of all, in most cases of scalping, victims are not actually in immediate danger of dying. It would be extremely painful, extremely traumatic, but the action in itself would not produce enough blood loss to actually kill somebody. But also the inflammation of Jana's tissue could have only come if she was still alive when it was happening. And the inflammation was present, meaning that she was alive when she was scalped. She was also alive when her left ear was removed and when her eyebrow was removed. And can you just imagine how painful that would have been? She must have been in so much pain. Evidence also showed that Blake didn't remove the scalp all at one time. He took his time, prolonging the torture, prolonging the pain. He did it in such a slow, sadistic manner, and he had scalped Jana by making a load of small incisions with a knife. And he did start to cut away the scalp with the knife, but then he began to tear the scalp from her head with his bare hands. And I just feel like I need to stop for a moment there, because what in the actual hell? That is barbaric. How can he do that to the mother of his child? But the terror and the torture does not stop there, because after removing Jana's scalp, this is when Blake dragged Jana's body to the ensuite bathroom. He placed her inside the bathtub, and being completely inspired by his own comic book, this is when he attempted to drain all of the blood from Jana's body. He used gravity to help him with this. He made sure that the head was lower than the legs. He then would have had to keep running water over Jana's scalp to prevent blood clots, and in order to keep the blood flowing over and over again. And I just want to remind you all that Jana is alive when this is happening. When he is trying to drain her body of all of her blood, she is alive. And I just can't believe it. It is just so sick and twisted. And again, how do we know that Jana was alive during this? Because the bloodletting and the sheer amount of blood loss that was caused to Jana's body could have only occurred with the assistance of a beating heart. So yes, Jana was still alive when she was being drained of all of her blood. It was found that she was kept under the running water and her blood was being drained for at least 30 minutes. And it's not actually possible to drain a human body entirely of its blood, because the heart would actually give up before this could be possible, because blood loss is fatal when half the original amount is lost. But Blake did manage to keep this going until Jana did lose almost half of the blood in her body, which would have been so incredibly difficult. He did this with a sick and twisted clinical precision. And I don't even know how he learned how to do this, because research went into this. I mean, maybe he researched on how to do this when he was writing his comic book. And it was found that Jana had lost half the amount of blood in her body. And tragically, after what could have been hours, if not days of torture, at the hands of her fiancé and father of her child, Blake Leibel, Jana lost her life. And that's what makes this case so much more heartbreaking, because if you remember, Olga phoned the police pretty much straight away. She begged the police for somebody to go over and check her daughter, but they didn't understand her. There was miscommunication over the phone. But if the police had gone over and checked on Jana, they may have been able to save her, because it is highly likely that she was still alive at that point. It is possible that she was even still alive when Olga and the police did in fact go over to the apartment, but Blake just wasn't answering the door. And I just have no words. The fact that she only gave birth 3 weeks prior to this to their baby, and Blake has just tortured his fiancée and the mother of his child to death. And for what reason? And throughout all of this, Jana's mum Olga had been waiting outside to hear about what had happened to her daughter. And now the police had the awful job of telling Olga that her daughter had lost her life. And she broke down. She was so distraught. She was inconsolable. And it's just so heartbreaking. Olga wanted to do everything for her daughter, to protect her daughter. She had been begging the police to investigate, and now it was just all too late. And Blake was arrested. The police continue to search the room, and they find $4,000 stuffed in his pocket along with a passport. So Blake had clearly been planning to flee the country, and thank God he had been caught before he did. He was then taken in for an interview, but he refused to talk. He refused to even acknowledge the fact that Jana had died. One of the officers told Blake that Jana was dead in his master bedroom, and he just looked at this officer and said so casually, "Well, I guess you'll find out who did it then." And I'm just like, is he being serious? I'm not kidding you. He actually said that. The only thing that Blake said during the questioning was that he wasn't responsible for Jana's death. But he didn't say anything more than that. He didn't give any details or other explanation or who else could be responsible for this. He told the officers that, quote, science would help them solve the case. And officers were totally baffled by him and just everything that he was saying. He just wasn't making any sense at all. And in the end, obviously, the officers did turn to science to figure out who had done this. They soon carried out a forensic investigation, and all of the evidence found pointed to Blake Leibel being responsible. Another thing that the police discovered was that during the torture and bloodletting process, which had taken Blake 8+ hours, if not multiple days, Blake had decided to order himself some food on Postmates. He gave the delivery driver specific instructions to just leave the food outside, don't knock on the door or anything. And just to prove how little he cared about Jana and how little remorse he has, he used Jana's own bank account to pay for his food. It's just so messed up. Also, he's the one that is the millionaire. So why is he using Jana's money? So given all of the evidence, the police knew that Blake was responsible for Jana's murder. But what they still couldn't figure out was why. Jana was utterly devoted to him. She was willing to do everything to save their relationship, to make it work, and he mistreated her time and time again. And when police asked Blake why he had done this, all he said was that women didn't like him. And if it wasn't for his money, women wouldn't show any interest in him. He did seem to have a deep resentment towards women. And he had spent his whole life trying to control women with money. So I don't know, is this why he snapped and lashed out? And it just doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. He is so delusional. It's like he was married. He actually found somebody that was willing to put up with him and married him. And then he was the one that cheated repeatedly on his wife Amanda. Don't forget that he's married. He's the one that had multiple girlfriends on the side, getting other women pregnant when he was married. And Jana was utterly devoted to him. And it didn't have anything to do with his money. So I think he's just delusional. I really do. I think he's just insecure and pathetic. But we will never know the true motive because Blake never said, and still to this very day, he has never opened up about it. And in 2018, Blake finally went to trial. He did plead not guilty. He continued to deny that he had done this, but it didn't matter because there was just too much evidence. And Blake was found guilty of first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem based on how badly he had tortured Jana's body. And Blake was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And he still remains behind bars to this very day. And in the aftermath of this case, Olga did return to Ukraine with her granddaughter, so Jana's daughter, who would now be around 8 years old. The Leibel family did not speak to Olga or the baby girl throughout the whole investigation, throughout the whole trial, and for 2 years after the murder. They didn't acknowledge the child at all, even though she was family, until February of 2020, when Olga filed a wrongful death lawsuit and was rewarded $41.6 million. And my heart does go out to Jana's daughter. It is just so tragic that she has to grow up without her mother because of that evil monster who happened to be her biological dad. It is just so messed up. She was robbed of a life with her mom because of that monster. And then we have to talk about Amanda, because remember, Amanda, his wife, she obviously had 2 children with Blake. Well, I don't exactly know what happened there. The only thing that I know is that she was in the process of divorcing Blake when Jana was murdered. But did Amanda know about Blake's double life at the time? Did Amanda know that Blake had had a child with another woman, that he also had a girlfriend, Constance, that had accused him of sexual assault? Did she know about any of that? I mean, we can assume that she found out everything when the trial happened and when the investigation was going on. But my heart goes out to Amanda as well, and her 2 children. But now I want to end the video remembering the victim of today's case, Yana. Yana Cassian was described as a caring, hardworking, and intelligent young woman. She'd always had big dreams of becoming a model. She moved from Ukraine to California to achieve those dreams. She then had a child. All her dreams were coming true. She was looking forward to becoming an amazing mother, but this was all cut short. She was taken far, far too soon. She was only 30 years old. And it's just crazy how young she was. And she was murdered in the worst way imaginable. And it was just so senseless. Blake clearly just murdered Yana because he couldn't completely control her. And it's just such a heartbreaking case. So that brings us to the end of today's case. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.